Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
It would be, quote, a major cultural loss.
What I think is great right now is it's raising the discussion in the community about the importance of historic architecture.
Do you think they could face some pushback from the community if they don't proactively take this on and not just wait for third parties to step up?
Well, I think that they're already facing significant pushback from the community. If the symphony is planning on and has the capacity, and they certainly do, to raise $100 million for an expansion, then what's $1 million more, you know?
I'm Sarah Fensky. The proposed $100 million renovation of Powell Hall means good things for the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. But one piece of it has preservationists alarmed. The symphony has won preliminary approval to demolish a 19th century home known as the Culver House. The city's preservation board voted 3-2 to approve the symphony's plans, including that demolition, last week. But the meeting also led to an offer that could change the equation. And joining us today with more is Andrew Weil. He is executive director of the Landmarks Association of St. Louis, which has advocated for Culver House to be saved. Andrew, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And we're also joined today by Steve Smith. He's the CEO of the Lawrence Group Architects and co-founder of the New and Found development firm that's responsible for the City Foundry and other cool projects around town. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Sarah.
So, Andrew, I want to start with you. You spoke at the Preservation Board meeting in favor of Culver House's preservation. Can you tell us just a little bit about this house? What makes it worth saving?
Well, I don't know how much time we have here.
We're looking for maybe the 1 minute version, yeah.
The 1 minute version. It's a very rare survival residential building in the Midtown area, an area that once had incredibly dense and incredibly beautiful residential neighborhoods all surrounding what became the grand, Midtown Theater District. But so much, almost essentially all of that residential architecture was destroyed in the middle of the 20th century. And so there are very few surviving remnants of what that neighborhood once looked like. And it was one of the finest residential architectural collections in the city. And then I would also just state that this is a very, not just a beautiful and significant home, but a very potentially useful home. And I just think that it deserves at least a very hard look, scrutiny to see if we can, just not lose another building there in an area where really the ultimate goal is to rebuild and restore the density.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, you said you could see a lot of uses here. When's the last time this building actually was in use?
Well, I think the last use of it was for the Portfolio Gallery, which was an art gallery operated by a man named Robert Powell. I'm not sure exactly when the symphony purchased it from Mr. Powell, or if indeed that is exactly the chain of ownership. Mm-hmm. But to my knowledge, it has not been used in several years actively.
Okay. So, Steve, I think the great excitement that happened at this Preservation Board meeting is that you made a spur-of-the-moment offer that could lead to Culver House being saved. I guess my first question should be, what were you doing at this Preservation Board meeting to begin with? Were you interested in this particular issue?
So, no. So for background purposes, I'm a friend of the Symphony. I've redeveloped the historic buildings across the street from the Symphony, the Grand Center Arts Academy, the Sun Theater, and now Leon got Arts Hotel. And so they've been great neighbors for many years, and I really appreciate what they're doing. But separately, I'm also a preservationist. I've been restoring buildings in St. Louis for 42 years, since 1979. And so I'm sitting in this meeting, and I'm hearing both sides, and both sides have valid cases. The symphony to create a world-class facility for a world-class symphony, and the preservation community trying to preserve the wonderful legacy we have in St. Louis. And it just popped in my head, the symphony offered to give the building away in the hearing. And I thought, well, shoot, I have land. I'll contribute the land if the community can step up and find a way to fund the move. So I threw it out there, and I'm sort of amazed with the reaction. So
yeah, I mean, this is kind of a big thing to just kind of throw out there. I don't know that happens every day. You have a particular relocation spot. This would be the southwest corner of Sam Shepherd Drive, Cardinal Avenue. That's pretty close to where this building is today.
So, I own multiple properties. I've been in Grand Center since 1999. So what are the 23 years? And so there are parcels that we own. And so we'll find a place to put it. That's where I was thinking we would put it, because it's in an area where there are other residences.
Yeah.
And to Andrew's point, the thing sits there by itself, surrounded by parking lots right now. It'd be nice if it was in an area where there were other houses, so it feels like it contributes to a community, to a neighborhood, which it doesn't right now.
So, Andrew, thinking about this idea of moving this, do we lose something when we move a historic home, even if we're only just moving it a couple blocks away? Or is it the home itself that really is worth preserving, not its current location?
You certainly lose the sense of place, the original sense of place, by moving one of these buildings. It should always be regarded as a last-ditch sort of triage effort to retain the building, even if it's not on the original location. We almost certainly would lose the eligibility that the property currently has for listing in the National Register of Historic Places by moving it. But I think that everybody would rather see the property moved and retained and reused and celebrated than see it crushed up and tossed in a landfill.
Well, we want to hear from you. Do you support saving Culver House? Why or why not? Would you actually pitch in? Would you put your money where your mouth is to make that happen? Call us at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can also send us a tweet at STL on air. We have heard from some preservationists on Twitter. Chrysalis writes on Twitter, it's so strikingly unusual that it must be saved. Lindsay writes, you never be able to build something like that again. That's beautiful. So we're thinking about, okay, this could move. It could move pretty close. How hard is it to move a building like Culver House? Steve, do you have any thoughts on whether this is even doable?
Yeah, so it's been done in the past. A masonry house is more difficult than a frame house because, the brick, it was built 100 years ago, so the fear is you end up with a pile of bricks in the middle of the street halfway down the move. But,
yeah,
there
that's
are
a
professional
potential
movers,
hazard.
and I know in the NGA site there was a house moved 5 years ago or so, and the symphony I think is out getting pricing right now. So I think they're being a partner in trying to see if there's a path here. So anyway, I think it's logistically possible, but it is expensive.
And how expensive are we talking?
The house that I heard that was moved in 5 years ago at NGA was about $500,000 for the move, and I think there was another $250,000. They had to move power lines, and that was $750,000 5 years ago. So, and that doesn't include trying to make the house usable again because it's a little long in the tooth. So
it needs some work even beyond the movement of it.
Yeah.
Andrew, does this seem doable? Is this something where if people could ante up the money, this is a price tag that would even make sense?
Yeah, well, first I'd like the opportunity to say that our Landmarks Association of St. Louis and these preservationists, as we're calling them, who are concerned about this, I think universally have nothing but respect for the St. Louis Symphony and for what they've done in Grand Center, and everybody wants to see SLSO get what it needs to thrive and continue to contribute and create even more of a world-class institution there. So it's not really an either-or proposition here. We're just looking to come up with a creative solution. It certainly can be moved. There's no question about that. And it's something I actually forwarded to St. Louis Public Radio, I think it was last week, some scans of the old city directories from the turn of the the 19th century, when the city was full of house movers. It was a very, very common thing to do, and there are wonderful pictures of houses just like this, of this scale and of this type of construction, being moved using nothing but mechanical leverage and teams of horses and mules. So they could easily do it 100, 120 years ago. We certainly have the technology capacity to do it today.
Well, that seems so hopeful. I want to go to the phone lines. Randy is calling from South St. Louis. Randy, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Everyone, thanks for taking my call, and I really applaud and respect the efforts of Andrew and Landmarks Association and Steve Smith in hoping to find a compromise in this issue. What I really want to stress is that that most cities do not have the rich historic urban fabric that St. Louis has in spades. It is truly our greatest competitive advantage as a city. And the Symphony, being the prestigious cultural institution that it is, has a responsibility and an obligation to reflect the character and the class and sophistication of the city it serves. And part of that rich cultural context comes from our irreplaceable urban fabric and the distinctive architecture that defines St. Louis. And I think this could really be a win-win if we can find a way to move this building so that the Symphony can proceed with its impressive expansion plans while also respecting what was there long before. And then it would be a win-win for everybody, and the Symphony could be lauded as a hero rather than a villain, and we can all go on and celebrate the great cultural amenities that the city has.
Randy, thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective. I'm hearing a lot of people say, hey, this building is so strikingly unusual and this is architecturally significant. Steve, you've been involved in a lot of these preservation efforts. Is that necessarily the case for this building?
First I would like to add, I think St. Louis is in a competition for talent, and to the point that the caller made, St. Louis City and St. Louis County lost population, that was reported just a week or so ago. And one of the differentiators we have is our wonderful, wonderful historic architectural legacy. I think as a community, we need to find a way to support the restoration of critical and key properties throughout the city to make our place more competitive. Yeah. So that what I think is great right now is it's raising the discussion in the community about the importance of historic architecture. This particular house, I think there's pros and cons. It's not in a historic district. It's not a nationally registered house. There are lots of properties that are really key that we need to restore. We're very active right now in trying to restore the Second Baptist Church on North Kings Highway.
That would be the Gospel Music Hall of Fame.
The Gospel Music Hall of Fame, and we don't have the money to do it right now. That is a treasure. And so I do think that this community needs to reflect on what do we want to do as a community to try and salvage the great and wonderful architecture so we can be more competitive to attract people in the future and hopefully grow population and jobs and all the other things that come with that.
Yeah, Steve, you mentioned that building that's in the Holy Corners part of the Central West End that you are working actively to try to save. That doesn't have funding yet either.
That's correct. And it's a not-for-profit as well. And so we're trying to figure out how can we do that? Because part of the problem we have in this community is demolition by neglect. Yeah. And so so many of the treasures we have are just literally rotting, if you want to call it that, and then falling down. We end up with an empty lot. So I think there's a broader conversation we should have as a community on how we can do this, and working with Landmarks and other organizations to have a more strategic approach to how we salvage our legacy architecture.
Let's go back to the phone lines. Jerry is calling from St. Louis. Jerry, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Good afternoon. My perspective about the Culver House, it comes from, I'm a priest who worked a lot in North St. Louis, and so I had a lot of connections in the black community and got to know Robert Powell and saw him with the classes for kids and went to some great art shows there. And so he was a black person who actually thrived about a few feet south of the Delmar Divide. Isn't that wonderful? I just think it would be so ironic if we threw away the house that Robert Powell used so creatively to use it for Walter Powell. I think there's room for Robert Powell, the artist, somehow to be saved, and Walter Powell, the shoe manufacturer who donated the money for the Symphony Hall, to be saved. We need to heal racial relations north and south of Del Mar.
Jerry, thank you so much for sharing that comment. And I didn't even make that connection between Robert Powell, who's been a guest on this show and was the last person to really use this space as an art gallery, and the name of Powell Hall. But there is some nice symmetry there. Let's go back to the phone lines. Andy is calling from St. Louis. Andy, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, how's it going? I would just like to add my 2 cents. I think the symphony is so loved in the city that if they put their name behind it, we could easily get a GoFundMe going to raise funds, and I'd be happy to help with that. And just like when they used to have the antique caravan, the market, a lot of those proceeds went back to the symphony. I think a GoFundMe is a no-brainer. We can move this house, and I believe it needs to be saved.
Andy, thank you for those comments. I like that idea of a GoFundMe. Andrew, there's a number of buildings people have talked about saving over the years, and as Steve said, demolition by neglect, it just hasn't happened. Do you think people would step up for this, put their money where their mouth is?
Well, I think that GoFundMe is probably not my first choice, although I appreciate that the caller is correct that there is an enormous amount of support for this idea in the community. But, the symphony is talking about $100 million expansion here. Moving this house, there are a lot of variables, but it would be, less than $1 million, I would expect. And that's coming from actually speaking with a company called EHM, Expert House Movers, who moved that previously referenced home within the NGA footprint a few years ago. So they have looked at this, and I understand that the symphony is actually looking at this with them. So, thank you to the symphony for considering this. But, this is a drop in the bucket. If the symphony is planning on and has the capacity, and they certainly do, to raise $100 million for an expansion, then what's $1 million more? That's 1/100th of what they're talking about doing. Plus, it's going to cost a lot of money to demolish this building. So there's a sunk cost already, baked into what the symphony is talking about spending. I think that honestly, the symphony owns the building. I can see using the building. It's big enough and beautiful enough that it would be an attractive place for the symphony maybe to put up visiting artists and turn it into an Airbnb type of a space for visiting artists. It could be practice space for smaller ensembles. The opportunities are really limitless. And I also think that because there's so much crossover between the membership and the supporters of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra and the preservation community in St. Louis, that an effort on behalf of the symphony, by the symphony, to do something creative with this building and save it might scare up donors that weren't already, thinking about contributing to the capital campaign that's getting going for the symphony. They might say, I never really thought about the St. Louis Symphony as being a historic preservation organization, but it most certainly is. And you need to look no further than the fact that it moved into the St. Louis Theater building at the end of the 1960s and saved that building and really provided a incredibly important anchor in a historic institution in Grand Center.
So our producer reached out to the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra to hear what they're thinking about this question. Maria Len Bernard, who's the president and CEO, said, quote, on March 28th, the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra received preliminary approval from the St. Louis Preservation Board regarding the renovation and expansion of Powell Hall. The meeting was informative. We received great feedback from participants who joined the public hearing. Our team is engaging in conversations with historic preservation experts and continues to explore options regarding the vacant building located behind Powell Hall. So that statement could go either way. It doesn't sound like they're saying they're necessarily going to take the lead. It also doesn't sound like they're ruling it out. Andrew, do you think they could face some pushback from the community if they don't proactively take this on and not just wait for third parties to step up?
Well, I think that they're already facing significant pushback from the community. And I hope, and from what I've seen, and I know the way that I, on behalf of Landmarks Association, have engaged with the symphony has been to try to be as constructive and as constructive as possible and supportive as possible, because, like I said before, we all want the symphony to have everything that it needs. We're just concerned about the idea that this beloved arts institution, beloved cultural institution, is perhaps naively putting itself in a position to destroy another beloved cultural asset. And I just think that a cooperative effort is so attainable. One other thing I wanted to mention is that the Cultural Resources Office approved this proposal primarily because it did not have jurisdiction over this building, because it's not in a preservation review area, and it was left out of the Midtown National Register District, which was a total mistake and has been. It was created by Landmarks Association. It was done in 1978. And it was an abject mistake to leave this building out. The district was mostly focused on the institutional and commercial buildings in the area, not so much the residential architecture. But if you look at the actual survey and the nomination, it does identify this building specifically and categorizes it as a building that, if demolition were to happen, it would be, quote, a major cultural loss. So just the fact that this was an oversight 40 years ago, it having unanticipated repercussions today, in that the Preservation Board did not, and the Cultural Resources did not have jurisdiction, doesn't mean it's not an important building, and it doesn't mean that things haven't changed since 1978.
Well, that is some really interesting perspective to share in there. And Andrew Weil, I want to thank you so much for sharing your insight into this today.
You're very welcome, and we look forward to continuing to engage our good friends with the St. Louis Symphony on this issue.
And Andrew is the executive director of the Landmarks Association of St. Louis. Steve Smith, you got involved because you're a supporter of the symphony. The symphony is now under some pressure to do something here. Are you hopeful that this building can be saved?
Well, I'm hopeful we can find a solution. Let me just put it that way. So I don't know what that path might be. Trying to play my part in doing that. So. I look at our legacy architecture more holistically in terms of what we need to do as a region. So, like I said, I've been doing it for a long time. I've seen how historic buildings can solidify neighborhoods and stabilize neighborhoods. And some of the iconic buildings that we've renovated over the years give pride to the community. And so that's where my focus is.
Well, I hope you're right, and there can be a solution here, and I appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski, with audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.